Work travel is something a lot of people absolutely dread. You have to leave your comfortable home, your routine, your bed, and go sleep in some strange place just to attend meetings and do things you would rather do online. For me, I especially hate to travel for work. It is always a stressful experience that makes me feel out of place. But about a year ago, my job told me I had to go to a training seminar. The good news was that it was only about a 3-hour drive away. The even better news was that the area I had to visit was absolutely beautiful. It was known for its rolling hills, its dense forests, and its scenic hiking trails. People from all over the region came there to vacation, so I figured, why not make the best of a bad situation? My wife hates when I travel for work. She gets lonely at our house, and I miss her terribly when I am gone. I thought this would be the perfect excuse to bring her along with me. It seemed like a great opportunity to turn a boring work trip into a nice little getaway for the two of us. I figured she could spend her days exploring the local shops, going for scenic hikes, or just relaxing at the house. Then, when I got done with my work obligations each afternoon, we would have the entire evening to ourselves to do whatever she wanted. It felt like a solid plan. We went online and found this cute little rental house. It was mostly secluded, tucked away in a heavily wooded area. It was not completely in the middle of nowhere, but there were enough trees surrounding the property that you could not see any of the neighboring houses. It felt very private and peaceful. When we finally arrived that first night, we walked around the property and explored the inside of the cabin. It was small but incredibly charming. I remember my wife looking around the living room with this big smile on her face. She told me she would love to buy a house just like this one day. The cabin had a main floor and a very large basement. When we looked down there, we saw it was filled with old boxes, storage containers, and random pieces of furniture. It was a bit dusty and dark, but we did not think much of it. It was just a basement, after all. We went to bed that night feeling happy and relaxed. Little did we know, our short trip was about to turn into an absolute nightmare. The first morning of the trip, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get ready for my work seminar. After I reached over and turned my alarm off, the very first thing I noticed was that my wife was not in bed with me. Usually, she sleeps in, so this was highly unusual. That caused me to jump out of bed with a little fire in my step. I felt a sudden wave of worry wash over me. I walked out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. To my relief, she was sitting on one of the bar stools, holding a warm mug of coffee and scrolling on her phone. But when I looked closer at her, she did not look right. She looked exhausted, and her eyes were wide. When I asked her why she was awake so early, she looked up at me and told me that she simply could not sleep. She explained that she had woken up in the absolute middle of the night. When she rolled over to face the corner of the bedroom, she thought she could see someone standing there in the darkness. She tried to squint and focus her eyes, but the room was just too dark to be completely certain. She rolled back over, trying to convince herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But she said she could not get back to sleep. She told me that she almost fell asleep at one point, but then she thought she heard a faint rustling noise coming from that exact same corner. After that, she was wide awake. She said she just could not shake the terrifying feeling that someone was standing in the shadows, watching her sleep. At 5 in the morning, she could not take it anymore. She got up, made some coffee, and had been sitting out in the kitchen ever since. I felt absolutely terrible for her. I could see in her face that she was completely exhausted, and I could even see that she was still a little scared. I got dressed and ready for work, and before I left, I asked her if she was going to be okay. She told me that she was going to get ready and go explore the town, while I was at my work obligation. She explained that she did not want to stay at the house alone any longer than she absolutely needed to. As I was getting ready to leave, she was laying out her clothes on the bed for after her shower. I saw her place a blue sweater, jeans, and a pair of white socks neatly on the mattress. I kissed her goodbye, and as I walked out the front door, I could hear the sound of the shower turning on. According to her, when she got out of the shower, she walked back into the bedroom and noticed that her clothes were slightly different from how she had left them. Instead of being folded neatly and stacked on top of each other, they were half folded, and just thrown into a single messy row across the bed. She was instantly on edge, but she tried to tell herself it must have been her imagination. She got dressed as quickly as she could, but when she went to grab her socks, she realized they were gone. She knew she had left the socks out on the bed, but now they were nowhere to be found. She felt like she was going crazy. Terrified, she grabbed another pair of socks from her suitcase, ran out of the front door, and locked it behind her. Since I had the car for work, she ordered an Uber to take her into town. Throughout the morning, I could tell something was off. When she was texting me, I was getting these short one-word answers, which is completely unlike her. I managed to get out of my work meeting early, so I met my wife for lunch at a small diner in town. When I sat down across from her, she did not look well at all. This is where she finally told me about the clothes situation, and how her socks had just magically disappeared from the bed while she was in the shower. I did not know what to say. I believed her completely, but I just did not have a logical solution, or any idea of what could possibly be happening. Since I was done with work for the day, we decided to spend the rest of the afternoon walking around the town together. We had a great time, and by the time night rolled around, we had dinner back at the house, and my wife looked much better. Whatever weirdness had been happening before, and bothering her, looked like it was over now. But in the middle of that night, she suddenly shook me awake. She whispered that she had just heard a weird noise. As soon as she told me, I lay perfectly still and listened. Within seconds, I could hear it as well. It sounded exactly like the faint sound of someone walking around on the wooden floors of the house. I could feel her shaking next to me. She begged me not to leave the bed, but I knew I needed to find out if there was actually someone in the house with us. I got up, turned on my phone flashlight, and quietly walked through the dark hallway. I checked the living room and the kitchen. The only thing I noticed that was out of the ordinary was that a closet door in the hallway was standing wide open. I know this sounds stupid, but I assumed the door had just opened on its own. I know it is unlikely, but I have had old doors do that before. I even rationalized in my head that the walking sound we heard must have just been the creaking of the wood when the closet door drifted open. I looked inside the closet just to be absolutely sure, and it was completely empty. I went back to the bedroom and told my wife that the house was clear and that we had nothing to worry about. But she had it firmly fixed in her mind that something was not right. She could not sleep a single wink. I decided to stay up with her for the rest of the night, sitting in the dark, waiting for the morning light. That morning I got ready for work, and she also got dressed immediately. She did not want to stay one single second in that house without me. We met up for lunch again, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked if we could please go back to the house, pack our things, and leave. I felt absolutely terrible because I had to tell her that we needed to stay one more night. The next day, I had one final morning meeting that was incredibly important, and I could not miss it under any circumstances. This was definitely not the relaxing trip I had wanted for us. The thought of staying in that house for one more night was absolutely crippling for her. I offered to get us a hotel room instead, but because I had already spent so much money on this rental house, she agreed to tough it out for just one more night to save our finances. When we got back to the house that afternoon, we packed up all of our suitcases, so we would be ready to leave the very second my meeting was over the next morning. We ordered a pizza that night and sat in the living room to eat. I could tell she was terrified to go to sleep. We ended up playing a trivia game on my phone for a couple of hours to keep her distracted. But every so often, we would hear this strange, muffled thumping noise coming from the basement below us. Every single time we heard it, my wife would crumble. I tried telling her that it must just be the house settling or the pipes making noises, but she could not accept that. As we were sitting there, I finally decided that I was going to go down and check the basement one more time. She begged me not to go, but I told her that I wanted to prove to her that the house was completely safe and that she had absolutely nothing to worry about. I walked to the basement door, opened it, and headed down the wooden stairs. The basement was incredibly dark. There was only one single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and it was not a good one. It gave off this very dim, dirty yellow glow. I walked around the room, shining my phone light past the piles of cardboard boxes and old furniture. Everything looked just as dusty and undisturbed as before. Just as I was about to turn around and head back upstairs, something caught my eye in the far corner of the room. I turned my head back around and froze. Standing in the dark corner of that room, partially hidden behind a stack of storage crates, was a man wearing a dirty red hat. He was standing so incredibly still that for a split second, I swear I thought it was just a hat rack, or maybe an old mannequin that the owners had stored down there. I took a small step closer to get a better look, and then the man blinked. My entire body went cold. I absolutely freaked out. I turned around and sprinted up the basement stairs as fast as my legs could carry me. I burst into the living room and screamed at my wife to get to the car right away. I told her I would grab the bags. We had 3 bags in total. I grabbed 2 of them, ran to the front door, and threw them out onto the grass. My wife ran to the car and started loading them into the back, while I ran back inside to grab the very last bag and our phone chargers. As I was running through the hallway toward the bedroom, I noticed with horror that the basement door was now standing wide open, and the hallway closet door was slightly ajar. I took a deep, shaky breath, and I sprinted past the closet and the basement door. I grabbed the last bag, ran out of the house, threw the bag into the back seat of the car, and we drove away as fast as we could. Once we were a safe distance away, I called the rental manager. I was shaking, and I told her that there was an actual person living in the basement of the house. The woman on the phone instantly started arguing with me, trying to tell me that I was mistaken and that it was probably just a shadow or my imagination. I was so angry and frustrated that I just hung up the phone on her. I do not even know if she ever followed up on what I said. Thankfully, my wife and I were completely okay, but just because we made it out of there unscathed does not make it any less terrifying. This man had literally been wandering around the house with us all weekend long. I believe my wife without a shadow of a doubt now. She really did see someone standing in our dark bedroom on that very first night. It was almost certainly that guy from the basement. I do not even want to think about what he wanted with us, or why he was stealing my wife's socks while she was in the shower. I know I could have pursued the matter further with the police, but honestly, we just wanted to let it be and put the entire ordeal behind us. Having your own private house to stay in while you travel is a cool concept, but I think I am going to stick to standard hotels for a very long time. They might have their own creepy moments, but at least there, you expect to have other people around. People who hopefully will not be hiding in your basement and watching you sleep. Now, I like to travel, but I really do not like to travel alone. Because of that, whenever I have a trip planned, I will often try to convince the girl I am seeing at the time to accompany me. One of the most memorable trips I ever took was to Costa Rica with a girl named Julie, whom I had been dating for a few months. I really wanted to impress her, so I booked us a room at the Four Seasons Resort. It was a damn beautiful place in every single way. It was easily one of the nicest and most luxurious resorts I have ever stayed at in my entire life. But that trip became memorable, not just for its incredible beauty, but for the insanely weird and deeply disturbing experience we had toward the very end of our stay. We were staying there for 4 nights, which, trust me, cost me a very pretty penny. The resort was not cheap by any means, but the amenities were absolutely top tier. For the first 3 days, our vacation was honestly amazing. We swam in the ocean, ate incredible food, and relaxed. On our 3rd night, late in the evening, we went to a restaurant for dinner, and then sat on the beach to watch a spectacular fire show. As the night went on, the pool area and the public spaces slowly started to clear out. Eventually, it was just the 2 of us left awake. We decided to run back to our room to grab a bottle of tequila we had purchased, along with a few mixers, and bring them down to the hot tub near the main pool. The hot tub was incredibly beautiful. It was covered in just about every single direction by thick tropical trees and lush plants, leaving only a very narrow opening to get in and out. There was also a large stone waterfall pouring into the hot tub, which made a lot of splashing noise. Because of the waterfall, we could talk and laugh as loudly as we wanted, without worrying about disturbing anyone. We were having a great time drinking and joking around, but our fun was suddenly interrupted when I looked through a small gap in the tropical plants. I noticed that someone was on the other side of the bushes, creeping around. This was not a person just casually walking along the resort walkway. This person was crouching down low to the ground, actively spying on us in the hot tub. I instantly shouted, "Hey!" and started to get out of the hot tub. But let's face it, getting out of a wet pool or hot tub takes a few seconds to do. By the time I actually got my feet onto the concrete and ran out onto the main walkway, I only saw the fleeting shape of someone hurrying away before they turned a corner and disappeared from sight. Julie was calling out to me from the water, telling me to just come back and leave it alone. But my adrenaline was pumping. I ran ahead and turned the exact corner that the person had just disappeared around. But when I got there, I saw absolutely nothing. It was just an empty, dark trail leading toward the guest units. It was actually leading directly in the direction of our own room. When I walked back to the hot tub, Julie and I tried to have a mild laugh about it. We told ourselves it was probably just a weird guest or a resort worker checking on the pool. But really, the fun vibe of the night was completely dead because we no longer felt like we had any privacy. We grabbed our towels and started walking back to our room. To get from the pool section back to the guest villas, you had to walk down a path that was pretty dark at night. The path was sandwiched between the guest buildings on the left and the thick wild jungle on the right. When we got directly across from our unit, which was located on the first floor, we suddenly heard a loud rustling noise coming from the jungle on our right. Now it is a tropical jungle, and there are animals everywhere, so you expect to hear rustling sounds. But this specific rustling stood out immediately because it sounded much bigger and much more intense than any small animal. It sounded completely human-made. Julie gasped, gripped my arm, and said, "Let's go in, please." I told her to go ahead, and I handed her our wooden key card. I stepped closer to the edge of the dark path and stared into the blackness of the jungle, trying to see what was making the noise. And then I started to hear this bizarre buzzing sound. It did not sound like an insect or a wild animal. It sounded exactly like a human being making a low, grumbling, buzzing noise from the back of their throat. As I stood there frozen, whatever, or whoever was hiding in the thick brush, suddenly scattered away, running deeper into the dark jungle. I was left standing on the path with my heart pounding in my throat. I turned around, hurried after Julie, and slammed our heavy wooden door shut behind me. Julie had not heard the weird throat buzzing sound, but she had definitely heard the heavy footsteps scurrying away into the brush. We both felt like someone was actively stalking us. We made sure all the doors were locked and just went straight to bed, figuring that nobody could get into our locked room. The next day, while we were lounging by the beach, we decided to tell one of the resort workers about the strange encounter we had the night before. We did not want to cause a scene, but we wanted to give them a warning so they could keep an eye out for other guests. We stayed on the beach for a few hours, relaxing under an umbrella. During that time, a man dressed in a resort employee uniform walked up to our lounge chairs, holding a professional camera. He smiled warmly and asked us to pose for a photo. We figured it was just a standard service the resort offered, so we smiled and let him take our picture. The man took the photo, smiled, said thank you, and walked away. We watched him, expecting him to walk up to other couples on the beach to take their photos too. But when we looked up a few seconds later, the man was completely gone. He had not approached anyone else. It was also worth noting that every single employee at this resort was Costa Rican. This particular man was white. That is not the craziest thing in the world, but he was incredibly pale, even whiter than Julie and I were. We both noted how strange that was, but we tried to move on with our day. That night, things started out very nice. We got a great dinner, watched the sunset over the ocean, and spent some time relaxing. We had an early flight the next morning, so we decided to call it a night pretty early. We were both exhausted from the sun and fell asleep very easily. However, in the early hours of the morning, I suddenly woke up in the pitch dark room. It had to be somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning. When I opened my eyes, I was facing our sliding patio door. Our suite had a beautiful private patio with a large sliding glass door, and the entire patio was screened in to prevent bugs from getting inside. We had left the sliding glass door open that night, so we could listen to the peaceful sounds of the ocean waves and the jungle animals. But as I lay there, I heard a sound that did not belong. It sounded exactly like the digital beep of a camera taking a picture. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering in my chest. I was about 30% sure of what I heard, until a second later, I heard it again. It was the distinct mechanical shutter click and the high-pitched beep of a camera. I sat straight up in bed and stared at the patio. Standing right on the other side of the mesh screen, just feet from our open door, was a dark silhouette of a person. I screamed, "Hey!" as loudly and angrily as I could, but deep down, I was absolutely terrified. All I could see of this person was their black outline against the night sky. The silhouette instantly turned and sprinted away into the darkness of the resort grounds. Julie woke up screaming, and I hurriedly told her what I had just seen. I ran over, slammed the sliding glass door shut, locked it, and immediately called the front desk. I made a very loud and anxious report about what had just happened, and demanded that they send security to our room right away. An employee arrived at our door 10 minutes later. I explained everything to him. I told him about the stalker in the hot tub, the man with the camera on the beach, and the person standing on our patio. The employee looked at me with a serious expression and told me that the resort absolutely does not have employees walking around taking pictures of guests on the beach. That confirmed my worst fear. It was the exact same person. This stranger had been stalking us for the past 2 days. I demanded that they move us to a new room immediately because we did not feel safe. They agreed and also promised to check all of the resort's video surveillance footage from the past 48 hours. They moved us to a different suite located much closer to the main lobby. We kept the patio door of that room tightly shut. We barely slept for the rest of the night. Early the next morning, we got up to catch our airport shuttle. While we were checking out at the front desk, the resort manager asked to speak with us. He took us into an office and showed us the security footage they had recovered. On the screen, we watched in horror as a man creepily walked around the resort grounds. The footage showed him hiding in the bushes near the hot tub, crouching in the jungle near our villa, and walking along our patio. The manager confirmed that based on the cameras, this man was only tracking and taking pictures of Julie and me. He did not watch or follow anyone else. It was the most horrifying and confusing thing I have ever witnessed. We had to leave to catch our flight, but the manager assured us that if they found the man, legal action would be taken. We were just incredibly relieved to get on that plane and leave the country. I followed up with the resort a few days later, but they apologized and said they had no new updates, which was incredibly disappointing. I do not see Julie anymore, but this is a deeply disturbing story that the two of us will share for the rest of our lives. I absolutely hate reliving this next story, but it is so incredibly crazy that I feel like I need to share it. Last year, I managed to get a week and a half off from my job, so I decided to travel back home to see my parents. I currently live and work in South Carolina, but my entire family still lives up in Massachusetts. It is not exactly a short trip, but it is a relatively easy drive if you just stick to the highway. My parents are older and retired, and they do not get to leave their house very often because my dad severely injured his back when he was still working. My genius plan was that I was going to drive throughout the night and surprise my parents in the morning when they woke up. I only told my brother that I was coming home, just so someone in the family knew I was on the road in case of an emergency. Usually, I hate driving at night, but I have found that this specific drive is much easier to do overnight. There is almost no traffic, so I can just throw on a podcast and relax while I drive. But my absolute least favorite part of the drive is when I have to go through Pennsylvania. No disrespect to the people who live there, but that state just feels like it never ends. It is all winding mountain roads and endless trees. Not to mention, it feels like every single time I drive through Pennsylvania, the weather is terrible. It is always so foggy that I feel like I am driving through a solid wall of white paper. This trip was absolutely no different. The fog was incredibly thick, and I was white-knuckling my steering wheel, focusing as hard as I could on the faint white lines on the road. Suddenly, I saw a bright orange detour sign ahead. Apparently, there had been a major accident on the highway, and the police were redirecting all traffic off the main road and onto the local back roads. I followed the signs and exited the highway. I continued driving for what felt like a really long time, and I quickly began to feel like I was completely lost. The road was narrow, dark, and surrounded by thick woods. There was no sign of life anywhere. To make matters worse, my phone completely lost service, so I could not even use my GPS to figure out where I was or how to get back to the highway. At this point, I had been driving for hours since leaving South Carolina, and exhaustion was starting to set in. My eyes felt incredibly heavy, and I was desperately looking for a gas station, a rest stop, or literally any safe place where I could pull over and shut my eyes for a few minutes. But I did not feel comfortable parking on the side of this dark, desolate back road. There was something deeply unsettling about the thick fog and the complete silence of the woods. I started to doze off, my head dropping down before I would jerk myself awake. I knew I should have pulled over immediately, but I foolishly kept telling myself that I could hold on for just a little bit longer. I was wrong. I dozed off for a split second too long, and my car drifted off the asphalt. I jerked the steering wheel in a panic, but it was too late. My tires hit the soft dirt, and my car slammed into the metal guardrail. The impact sent my car rolling down a steep ditch. The car rolled completely over, but thankfully it landed back on its wheels in an upright position. I sat there in the dark, my body shaking violently. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my entire life. If you have ever been inside a rolling car, you know exactly how helpless and horrifying it feels. I sat there for several minutes, trying to catch my breath and check myself for injuries. I grabbed my phone to see if I could call for help, but the screen was completely shattered and dead from the crash. Because of the angle at which the car was resting in the ditch, I had to push with all my strength just to get the driver's door open. I crawled out of the car and climbed up the steep embankment back to the road. I stood there in the cold, foggy air, looking down at my ruined car. I wanted to crawl under a rock. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. A few minutes later, I was sitting on the damp grass next to the road, basically grieving on the inside. As I sat there, I suddenly saw two bright headlights slowly piercing through the thick fog. My first instinct was to stand up and flag them down for help, but something in my gut told me to stay quiet. I watched as a large pickup truck drove past my position. But then, the truck stopped about 20 feet in front of me, and I heard the sound of its gears shifting. The truck began slowly reversing back toward me. When the truck stopped right next to me, the passenger window rolled down. Inside the truck was an older couple. The woman sitting in the passenger seat leaned out and made a comment about how I looked like I needed some help. I did not answer her right away. They seemed like they were trying to be nice, but this was the very first car I had seen on this road in hours, and it was the middle of the night in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. Nice or not, I felt incredibly uneasy. She asked me again if I needed help, and I slowly nodded my head. The large man in the driver's seat got out of the truck, walked to the back, and grabbed a heavy metal chain from the truck bed. While he was doing that, the woman got out of the passenger side and started walking toward me. As she got closer, I noticed that she smelled absolutely horrible, like rotting garbage and old sweat. The way she was walking toward me was very aggressive. She kept taking steps forward, forcing me to take steps backward toward the rear of their truck. It felt like she was physically bullying me, trying to herd me in a specific direction. While she walked, she started going on this bizarre, angry rant about land ownership and the government. I just kept nodding my head and agreeing with everything she said, wanting to keep her calm. I just wanted to see these people hook up the chain and pull my car out of the ditch so I could get out of there. But she kept getting closer, literally bumping her shoulder into mine as she ranted. Eventually, I realized I was standing right at the tailgate of their truck. She had successfully forced me all the way to the back. She suddenly stopped ranting, and a wide, unsettling smile spread across her face. She looked at me and told me that she wanted to show me something really cool that they had in the bed of their truck. I told her that it was okay, and that I just wanted to watch her husband hook up the chain to make sure he did not need any help. But every single time I tried to take a step away from the truck, she would physically step in front of me, cutting off my escape. She kept repeating, in this intense voice, that I really needed to look in the back of the truck. That is when I noticed the large man with the chain coming around from the other side of the vehicle. Both of them were now closing in on me, blocking me against the tailgate. I turned around and looked into the bed of the truck. There was a large, dirty canvas tarp covering something big. I did not want to find out what was underneath it. Just as I turned back to face them, the woman suddenly screamed the name. Paul! Instantly, the dirty tarp in the truck bed flew open. A third person, a younger man, emerged from underneath the canvas. In his right hand, he was holding a large knife, and he lunged forward, attempting to grab me with his free hand. I do not even know how I managed to do it, but my reflexes kicked in. I dodged his hand by throwing my body backward onto the gravel road. While I was on the ground, the old woman began to scream frantically, yelling orders at the two men. I scrambled to my feet and started running as fast as I possibly could. I did not stay on the road because I was terrified they would chase me down in their truck or shoot at me. Instead, I sprinted straight into the thick, dark woods. I could hear the younger guy crashing through the brush behind me, chasing me into the darkness. But thankfully, the adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and I was able to outrun him. I ran deep into the forest and hid behind a large fallen tree. Since I did not have a working phone, I had absolutely no idea how long I lay there in the damp dirt. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably much shorter. The entire time I was hiding, I thought I could hear the sound of footsteps nearby. It was probably just the natural sounds of the forest at night, but I was too terrified to move a muscle. Just when I was starting to think it might be safe to head back toward the road, I heard the raspy voice of the old woman echoing through the trees. She kept calling out for me, referring to me as Sonny Boy. She was not right next to me, but she was close enough that I knew if I made a single sound, she would hear me. She was shouting into the dark woods, telling me that everything was okay and that I could come out now. She said that they had successfully pulled my car out of the ditch and that they had not meant to scare me. Even though I was desperate for help, I was not a fool. I knew she was lying. I held my breath, pressed myself flat against the dirt, and prayed that she would walk in the opposite direction. Eventually, the woods went completely silent again. I waited what felt like another hour before I finally decided to sneak out of the forest and head back to the road. When I got back to my car, I saw that it was still stuck deep in the ditch. The woman had indeed been lying to get me to come out of hiding. But what was truly horrifying was that all of my car doors were now standing wide open. My luggage had been dragged out onto the road and torn completely apart. Most of my clothes and personal belongings were gone. It also looked like they had used the large knife to violently slash my leather seats to pieces. Their truck was gone, but I knew I could not stay there. I had a terrible feeling that they would come back to finish the job. I started walking down the road in the direction the truck had not gone. I walked for hours through the fog until I finally saw the bright neon lights of a 24-hour gas station. I burst through the doors, looking like a complete madman. I tried to explain to the cashier what had happened, but I was shaking so badly I could barely form coherent sentences. The cashier refused to let me use his phone, but he did call the police for me. When the state troopers finally showed up, they took my statement and helped me contact my brother. It took a few hours, but my brother finally arrived to pick me up. Unfortunately, the police were almost no help at all. They told me that without a license plate number, or a better description of the truck, there was very little they could do in that massive rural area. I was just incredibly happy to be sitting in the passenger seat of my brother's car, driving home in the bright daylight. I cannot even begin to imagine what the actual intentions of those backwoods people were. I do not think they just wanted to rob me. I felt like whatever they had planned for me under that tarp, it was something much worse. That was the absolute last time I ever drove long distances alone at night, and it will be the last time I ever take that route again. When most people think about traveling for vacation, they usually picture somewhere with a beautiful sandy beach. That is because most people need a solid break from their daily jobs or school to unwind. And there is truly no better place to do that than on a warm, relaxing beach. But this final story was definitely not a relaxing getaway. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend Ally and I decided to take a trip down south to enjoy some much-needed vacation time. Both of us work as registered nurses in New Hampshire. It is a beautiful state, but anyone who works in healthcare will tell you that the job is incredibly demanding, and sometimes you just desperately need a break. We wanted to get away from the cold and soak up some of that famous southern sunshine, so we booked a trip to Key West, Florida. Ollie has an intense fear of flying, so we decided to make the massive 24-hour drive from New Hampshire all the way down to the Florida Keys. Because we had saved up a lot of vacation time, we were able to take 2 full weeks off. This made the drive much more enjoyable because we were able to make several fun stops along the East Coast. When we finally arrived in Key West, we were absolutely blown away by our resort. It was right on the ocean, and the weather was perfect. For the first week, the trip was exactly what we needed to recharge our batteries, but on our very last night in Key West, everything changed. That night showed me that no matter where you are, even in a beautiful paradise, terrifying things can happen that are completely out of your control. Allie and I were lying on the beach late at night, watching the full moon reflect off the calm ocean water. It was one of those rare nights where the moonlight was so incredibly bright that it barely felt like nighttime at all. You could see everything clearly. We had spread a large beach towel on the sand, and Ally was lying with her head on my chest. What she did not know was that I actually had a small velvet box tucked into my pocket. I had carried her engagement ring with me the entire trip, and this was going to be the big night where I asked her to marry me. I started to get romantic, whispering sweet things into her ear. At first she was smiling and responding, but then she suddenly got very quiet. It was like she completely stopped listening to what I was saying. For a second, I thought she might have fallen asleep. I playfully asked her if she was still awake, but she quickly apologized and whispered that she had gotten distracted by 2 people who were standing nearby. She said it looked like they were just standing there, staring directly at us. I sat up on the towel and looked in the direction she was pointing. Sure enough, I saw 2 people walking slowly across the sand toward us. As they got closer, I could see them clearly in the bright moonlight. The woman was objectively very beautiful, but there was something deeply unsettling about her. She had wild, thick, curly hair, and her eyes looked incredibly dark and empty. She was wearing a simple beach cover-up over her bathing suit. She was holding hands with a man who I assumed was her boyfriend. He had a massive beard and long brown hair pulled back into a messy bun. He was wearing an unbuttoned red flannel shirt with no shirt underneath, and plain swim shorts. Even for a warm Florida night, wearing a flannel shirt seemed very strange. Once they reached our towel, they did not say anything. They just stood there, towering over us. They were standing uncomfortably close, almost right on top of where our feet were. Both of them were just staring down at us, wearing these wide, completely vacant smiles. Finally, Allie got uncomfortable and said, "Excuse me, can we help you with something?" The woman, still wearing that bizarre smile, spoke in a very slow, soft voice and said, "You 2 are quite beautiful, you know." I was completely speechless. My girlfriend, who has that tough nurse mentality and does not take any crap from anyone, just looked at her and said, "Thanks, you can leave us alone now." The woman looked at me, then back at Ally, and in a deeply haunting voice she said, "No, thank you." Throughout this entire exchange, she never stopped smiling. Her boyfriend stood next to her, completely stiff and motionless, just staring at us with the exact same creepy grin. Before we could even react, another couple walked out of the darkness and joined them. It was very late, so the beach was mostly deserted, and I initially hoped this new couple was coming over to help us escape this weird encounter. I could not have been more wrong. This second couple walked right up and stood next to the first 2, forming a semicircle around our towel. Just like the others, they were staring down at us and smiling. This second woman was also wearing a beach cover-up, but she had her hair styled in 2 lopsided pigtails. Her boyfriend had messy, shaggy, curly hair. The first woman looked up at them and said, "Look, a new couple." I did not know if we were being pranked by some weird locals, or if this was actually happening. I knew they had not physically threatened us yet, but every single alarm bell in my head was screaming. Nobody stands that close to complete strangers on a dark beach unless they are up to something bad. Their silent, unblinking smiles and rigid postures felt incredibly dangerous. The four of them began to slowly inch closer and closer to us. They got so close that the first girl's foot was actually touching my leg. I could tell that Ally had hit her absolute breaking point, and I knew I had to do something. I stood up, stepped in front of Ally, looked at the closest guy, and said, "Take one more step." I hoped that by standing up and confronting them, they would realize I was not an easy target and back off. I am a big guy, but I am not very intimidating. Ally always called me a giant teddy bear, so I am not exactly someone who inspires fear. Instead of backing away, all four of these people suddenly burst out laughing. It was a loud, mocking sound. For a brief second, I actually felt a wave of relief. I thought that maybe their laughter meant this was indeed just a stupid joke or a prank. But I was dead wrong. While the women continued to laugh, the two men suddenly lunged at me. I had absolutely no time to defend myself. They tackled me onto the sand and began to violently beat me. I fell to the ground, trying to cover my face and protect my pocket where the engagement ring was. While they were hitting me, I could hear Ally screaming in terror. The two women just stood there, watching the violence and laughing hysterically. Ally tried to jump in and pull the men off me, but the second girl violently shoved her back down onto the sand. The two men then picked me up by my arms and slammed me back down onto the sand right next to Ally. In the blink of an eye, the creepy smiles completely vanished from their faces. Their expressions turned into looks of pure, cold rage. One of the men began to aggressively fumble with something inside the inner pocket of his red flannel shirt. Even though I could not see what it was, I knew with absolute certainty that he was reaching for a pocket knife or some other kind of weapon. In that split second, a surge of pure survival instinct took over my body. I did not think, I just reacted. I threw my leg out and kicked the first girl's ankle with all the strength I had left. She was still standing very close to me, and the force of my kick caused her to lose her footing and stumble in the loose sand. The sudden fall of their friend distracted the two men for a fraction of a second. They both looked down at her. In that tiny window, I grabbed Ally's hand, pulled her to her feet, and we ran as fast as we possibly could toward the bright lights of our resort. My face was bleeding, and my ribs were in absolute agony from the beating. I looked back over my shoulder just once as we were running. The two couples were not chasing us. They were just standing there on the dark beach, watching us run. We burst through the doors of our resort, ran to our room, locked the heavy deadbolt, and turned off all the lights. We sat in the dark, listening to the door, terrified that they might have followed us. For reasons I still struggle to understand, we did not call the police that night. In hindsight, that was a massive mistake, but at that moment, we were in complete shock. We were so terrified of drawing any attention to our room or our location that we just wanted to remain completely invisible. The next morning, we got up early to check out of the hotel and begin the long drive home. The entire time we were loading our bags into the car, we were looking over our shoulders, terrified that every person we saw out of the corner of our eye was one of those beach attackers. As we walked out of the lobby toward our parked car, I froze. Standing on the corner of the street just outside the resort entrance were the two girls from the beach. They were talking to each other and did not see us. My heart was in my throat. We quietly got into our car, locked the doors, and I started the engine. To leave the resort parking lot, we had to drive right past the corner where they were standing. As we slowly rolled past them, both girls suddenly turned their heads and looked directly into our car. They recognized us instantly, but instead of running or looking angry, they both smiled warmly and waved at us, as if we were old, dear friends. Once we got onto the highway and were miles away from Key West, Ally finally called the resort to report what had happened to us. The receptionist apologized and said they would look into the matter, but we never heard anything back. I know this is not a story about ghosts or monsters, but to me, it was so much worse. We were incredibly lucky to escape that beach with our lives. The physical bruises eventually healed, but the memory of those empty, smiling faces under the moonlight is something that will stay with me for the rest of my days. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.